You've probably heard the stories: shadowy figures, a secret cult, a paradise garden used to brainwash young men into becoming mindless killers. It's the story of the assassins we all think we know. But what if I told you that most of it is a lie? In this explainer, we're going to peel back the layers of Hollywood myth to find the historical reality. Wow, just listen to this description from a European writer. A thirst for blood. They look like devils. I mean, this wasn't just a simple description. This was straight-up propaganda. It painted this picture of a terrifying, almost demonic force from the East, a story that was designed to thrill and scare people in the West for centuries. But you gotta remember who was telling this story. Outsiders looking in with a whole lot of fear and fascination.
So how are we gonna untangle all this? Well, first up, we'll dive into the legend itself, that blockbuster story of betrayal and revenge. Then we'll step into that supposed paradise garden. From there, we'll put on our detective hats and start looking at the actual evidence to separate fact from fiction. And that's gonna lead us to the real story of Alamut and the brilliant guy who ran the show. And finally, we'll see how a little bit of misinformation snowballed into a legend that has echoed through history.
So let's start with the popular story, the one that honestly feels like it was written for a movie. It doesn't begin with a war, but with a pact of friendship. The tale centers on three brilliant young men studying together back in 11th century Persia: Hasan-i Sabbah, the future leader of the assassins; Nizam al-Mulk, who'd become a super powerful politician; and the famous poet and mathematician Omar Khayyam.
The story goes that they made a deal. Whoever makes it big first will help the other two out. Sure enough, Nizam al-Mulk hits the jackpot and becomes the Grand Vizier, basically the second most powerful man in the Seljuk Empire. He keeps his promise and brings Hasan to court. But here's the twist. Hasan is just too smart, too ambitious. The Sultan asks for a full audit of the empire's finances. Nizam says it'll take 2 years. Hasan brags he can do it in 40 days, and he does. Nizam, seeing him as a major rival, supposedly sabotages the report. Hasan is humiliated and has to flee for his life. And this betrayal is the spark that lights the whole fire. It sends Hasan on a path to find his own power, deep in the mountain fortress of Alamut, where he eventually orders the death of his old friend. It's a drama of epic proportions.
Okay, so that brings us to the real heart of the myth, the secret of the assassin's incredible loyalty. I mean, how do you get someone to kill for you, to die for you, without even thinking twice? Well, the legend has an answer that is as brilliant as it is terrifying. The story goes that Hasan didn't just command his followers, he completely bewitched them. He supposedly built a literal paradise on earth, a secret garden hidden away in his cold, rocky mountain fortress. Just try to picture it. Palaces shining with gold, rivers flowing with wine and honey, beautiful maidens everywhere. It was a sneak peek of heaven and a super powerful promise of what his most loyal followers would get. And here's how the legend says he pulled it off. It's like a masterclass in psychological warfare. A young recruit gets drugged with hashish. He passes out and wakes up not in some cold barracks, but in paradise. He spends a few days living a life of total bliss. Then he's drugged again, and poof, he's back in the harsh reality of the fortress. Hasan then sits him down and says, "You've seen heaven. It's real, and you can go back forever. All you have to do is obey me." That promise of paradise became the ultimate weapon. You got to admit, it is a fantastic story, right? It's got everything: intrigue, exotic locations, drugs, a secret paradise. It's the kind of tale that's inspired countless books, movies, and video games. But this is where we have to hit the pause button and ask the most important question of all. So, is any of it actually true? This is where our story takes a really sharp turn. To find the truth about the Nizari Ismailis, the real people who got stuck with the assassin label, we can't just take the story at face value. We have to ask, who told this story? And when you start digging into the sources, the whole elaborate fantasy just begins to crumble. Okay, so here's the huge problem with the sources. First off, the most famous storyteller, Marco Polo, wrote his version almost 200 years after any of this happened. He was basically repeating rumors he heard while traveling. Second, and this is a massive loss for history, the Nizari's own library at Alamut was totally destroyed by the Mongols in 1256. So their side of the story, it literally went up in flames. What we're left with are stories written by their enemies or by foreigners who were fascinated by them. And that key word, Hashashen, which means hashish user, that was an insult, a nickname they never, ever used themselves. All right, so let's shift gears and look at what we actually do know. Because when we examine the hard evidence, the geography, the politics, the few records that did survive, the myth doesn't just get questioned, it gets completely blown out of the water. First up, that Paradise Garden. A quick look at the geography of Alamut Castle in modern-day Iran tells you everything you need to know. The castle was on a super high, rocky peak in a place that's extremely cold. It was known to get buried in snow for a big chunk of the year. This was a tough, strategic mountain fortress, not some place where you could secretly grow a lush garden with rivers of milk and honey. The climate just makes it impossible. And what about that whole dramatic story of the 3 childhood friends? Yeah, historical records show that's also pretty much made up. Nizam al-Mulk was born around 1020, but Hasan-i Sabbah was born almost 2 decades later. We're talking about a big age gap, so them being school buddies is really unlikely. On top of that, they were educated in different cities, and, this is a big one, they belonged to rival religious sects. Nizam was a Sunni, part of the ruling class, while Hasan was an Ismaili Shia, a minority that was often persecuted. It's way more likely they met as political enemies, not as old friends. And here's the final nail in the coffin for that revenge story. The assassination of Nizam al-Mulk. Well, while the Nizaris were certainly happy to see him go, some historians think the order might not have come from Hasan at all. The Sultan himself might have been worried that his own vizier was getting way too powerful. So Nizam's death might have just been a cold, calculated political move, and the Nizaris were just the perfect scapegoat. So if the stories about the garden and the childhood pact are basically fiction, how in the world did the legend of the assassins get so famous? Well, the answer is a cocktail of propaganda, a little bit of misunderstanding, and the undeniable power of a really good story. The name itself, assassin, was a label stuck on them by others. The Nizari Ismailis never called themselves that. The word probably started as a local insult used by their enemies in Syria. Then, European crusaders and travelers heard it, were totally fascinated and terrified by this secretive group in the mountains, and the name just spread like wildfire.
You can actually watch the legend get built piece by piece over centuries. It starts in 1175 with these vague reports of a mysterious mountain sheik. 100 years later, Marco Polo adds all the sensational details about the Paradise Garden. But the whole drugged killers idea doesn't get locked in until 1809, when a French scholar makes a guess, probably a wrong one, that connects the name assassin to hashish. It's like a 600-year-long game of telephone, where rumor gets repeated and embellished until everyone accepts it as fact.
So who were they, really? They weren't a cult of drug-crazed killers. They were the Nizari Ismailis, a minority Shia group led by a brilliant strategist named Hasan-i Sabbah. They were surrounded by the massive Sunni Seljuk Empire and were literally fighting for their survival, their mountain fortresses, or their lifeline. And those famous assassinations, they weren't random acts of terror. They were precision strikes, a form of asymmetrical warfare used to take out the leaders of a much bigger enemy. It was a strategy for survival.
And all of this leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought. The story of the assassins is a powerful reminder that history isn't always what actually happened. A lot of the time, it's just the version that got written down, especially when it's written by enemies or by really imaginative storytellers. The legend of the drugged, brainwashed killers was just a way more exciting, more terrifying story than the complex reality of a persecuted group fighting to exist. And it really makes you wonder, how many other facts we know from history are just the most sensational stories that managed to survive?